Hello everyone, this is Andy. Today I'm going to be filming a really quick video demo on some basic tips for how to use charcoal, which hopefully might give you some helpful information if you have not worked with charcoal much before. And even if you have, hopefully this will give you some new ideas for how to continue using this material in your own practice. All right, so to start, there are different kinds of charcoal that you can work with. For example, this old box contains a type of charcoal known as vine charcoal, which is quite light and not too dense. And this is a good tool for doing quick mark making or gesture drawing or sketching, because as a very kind of thin stick, it's easy to move around on the page very easily and leave behind lighter marks that are good for quick sketching or just sort of basic drawing. Now, on top of these marks I made with vine charcoal, I'm going to talk a bit about another type, which is compressed charcoal. Compressed charcoal usually comes in these sort of square crayon-like pieces. And so it's important when you're thinking about compressed charcoal that you recognize that because it's a rectangular prism, there's a lot of different edges and points that you can work with, as I'm sure you can see here as I'm holding up this piece. And so what I mean by thinking about the different edges and points is that with compressed charcoal, you can really, say, use a longer flat edge, like this one, to lay behind a much wider, thicker, and denser mark. Or if you would like to use one of the points, you can still leave behind a much thinner mark that's on the same scale as, say, the vine charcoal before. And what this means is by carefully controlling this simple piece of compressed charcoal, you can really achieve a very varied line of mark making that you can really control using different amounts of pressure, speed, and weight in order to get a lot of different types of mark and a great deal overall of versatility with this rather simple piece of compressed charcoal. And another thing with compressed charcoal too is you can use the longest edge still, the flat side of it, to quickly cover the page with a lot of tone. And so what I like to do is take another tool, which is this piece of sandpaper. And so what this does is by using sandpaper, rather than removing a lot of charcoal from the paper, as would be the case if you use, say, a chamois cloth, which starts to almost erase the charcoal, or even just a rag like this t-shirt scrap here, these materials pick up charcoal almost in a similar way that an eraser might. But with the sandpaper, I'm actually embedding charcoal into the bristle surface. Okay, and this brings me to my next point, which is thinking about using erasers. So with charcoal, while this is very much an additive material that you can layer additional darker marks on top of, thinking about effectively using an eraser is also a great way to think about working the charcoal, because with an eraser, rather than just using it to subtract areas of tone, you can really use it, as you can probably start to tell from down here, you can really use it as a great tool for mark making as well. And so depending on the type of paper you have, this may vary the types of mark that you're able to get out with the eraser. For example, because Bristol is quite smooth, using an eraser tends to leave quite smudgy marks. And you can really kind of drag the charcoal around in a way that's not just about removing the charcoal, but creating a more interesting surface using your broad eraser marks. And so using a type of eraser like this, like a hard rubber eraser, you can cut away quite sharp lines into your tone surface, whereas using something like, say, this small piece of kneaded eraser, which is a soft, malleable type of eraser, you can gently kind of pick up much more softer areas of charcoal in a way that doesn't leave as sharp or as distinctive a mark, but is good for also removing now large areas of tone. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a bit more exclusively about the charcoal pencil and thinking about how to work with line when using the charcoal pencil. And so one of the first things to think about is rather than just using a pencil sharpener to sharpen your charcoal pencils, what I like to use, especially for any type of pencil, colored pencil, graphite, etc., is I like to use a palette knife or a palette razor or any kind of basic simple razor. I like to use that to actually sharpen my pencils. What this now does is this gives us more exposed charcoal to work with, which is great when you're thinking about working with different kinds of mark making. Even with this really simple charcoal pencil, you can start to play with more broader, different kinds of mark, going from very thin, very skinny, to something that's a lot more thicker and slow. And so when working charcoal pencils, it's great to not only just work with the very tip of the pencil, but to try and use as much of this now exposed edge as well, which is useful for also quickly covering large areas of the paper with charcoal tone. And so, especially with the charcoal pencil, but also in general, it's good practice whether you're working on a table or on the wall to always try and use as much of your full arm as possible. Now, it's really hard to see because obviously I'm hidden behind the camera, but by using as much of your shoulder, your upper arm, really just your full drawing arm, you can really get more of a widely varied range of motion, and therefore you can get more versatility out of your tools than if you were just hunched over and only using your hand. Okay, so finally on this same sheet of paper, I'm going to talk about one last technique that could be helpful, which is the idea of using wet charcoal. So while charcoal is inherently a dry material, by using nothing other than just some water nearby, and in fact just dipping our charcoal in, you can also play with getting some really interesting darks out of wet charcoal, because by using the water to interact with the charcoal you're putting down, it actually becomes something sort of like ink in that it now is very dark and solid as compared to the graininess of charcoal before. So this could be an interesting technique if you're trying to achieve some really dark darks, but also because you've now just added water, it will be harder to erase off in a traditional manner. And you can also even further explore by using old brushes or something like that, adding water on top as a kind of wash layer. And then once you've wet your page, you can take the charcoal back and continue to draw on top of this wet surface and now get even darker, more meaty marks as such.
Okay, so next up through this voiceover, I want to talk a bit about drawing with the charcoal pencil. So as you can see right now, I'm drawing an imaginary sphere, and I'm using my marks to follow the curve of the form as if I were drawing the lines in a globe, and really just trying to think of the sphere as a 3D object of which I'm interpreting it in a 2D space. So that's just to say, when you're drawing with form and you're thinking of volume, avoid just using flat 2D strokes, and try and use your own interpretation of what that object's volume is to guide you in how you're applying your mark making. So for example, with the cube, I'm using parallel marks to follow the direction of the surface of the cube in order to indicate how the cube sits in space and kind of give an indication of how it's facing the viewer, and what planes are sort of falling away or traveling towards the viewer. So as you can see, as I add on a sort of triangle shape to the front face of the cube, even though the structure is more complicated, I'm still thinking about the directions of the different planes of the cube. And especially when dealing with shading, whether it's through line or, charcoal or any other means, having direction to your mark and having intentional direction really helps, because these directions then help the eye understand how is this form constructed? How does that nose kind of shape stick out the front of the cube? And how does it relate to the other faces, especially as I think about adding, cast shadows or other more complicated surfaces. And so for practice, as I try and draw a really rough sketch of that vase on my desk, now I'm starting to think of the vase as a series of just simple forms, which will help me understand how I'm going to apply my mark making. So really that vase is kind of a construction of two spheres with a little, lip on top. And it has a circular base, which I'm marking on the bottom. And as I mark the center line, I'm really just using it as a reference to understand how I will start my mark making when thinking about shading in the rough shadows in the vase, and also really just trying to use my mark making to describe its form. Because really, while I start out the sketch just drawing the outer edges of the vase from what I can see, now as I move into towards actually throwing down some basic shading, I'm also controlling my mark making in the direction that follows the sphere. Similar to, again, how you might think of the lines in a globe. The lines in the globe travel differently as you move away from the equator or the center axis, and same here on this vase. As I'm drawing on the vase and thinking about direction mark, even if it's vertical, horizontal, I'm still trying to follow thinking of the vase as a three-dimensional form with a curved surface. So my marks that I draw on the paper follow this same logic as a result. And really, I'm thinking about direction, curve, and how I'm interpreting that based on the form that I see in front of me. And especially when drawing something that's a bit larger, it's a good idea to really try and practice your motor control, how you hold the pencil with your hand or whatever drawing tool, so that you can concentrate on making gentle parallel marks with one sweeping broad motion, as well as those shorter hatch marks that you can see me making right there. And any improvements that you make towards practicing how you handle your drawing tools will also really help you more efficiently render out the form that you're drawing, especially if you're dealing with drawing from observation. This is all something that does take a little bit of practice to work on, but the more time you invest, the better it is, especially when, as you can see me drawing right there, when dealing with the versatility of different drawing marks, different lengths, different speeds, different surfaces, any kind of greater control of your tool, that all translates to helping you more efficiently draw what you're observing, and it all translates towards you drawing a more convincing form. So even in this very rough state right now, have a good basis from which to continue working my drawing.
And so hopefully these have all been some helpful tips in thinking about how to work with charcoal. In general, to sum everything up again, really just experiment and explore with what materials you have around, and practice by using your full body to work with charcoal, and not just thinking about using charcoal in a very simple, limited manner. So I hope that this video demo has helped. Thank you for watching.